Teachers of Reddit, what are some signs that a student is being abused or lives in a toxic environment? Story 1. Regression. I'm a speech therapist who works in an inner city elementary children where we see a lot of poverty, drug abuse, etc. I had one case stand out to me in particular that stands out. I saw a little girl, 7 years old, who had been delayed on her language skills. We knew she had a very difficult upbringing since she was the product of a rape. She lived only with her mother, who impressively kept the two events, the rape and the birth of her daughter, as separated as possible. The rapist, who I refused to call a father, had served time in jail but was released at this point on house arrest. He had no rights to see her. But the rapist's parents, technically the child's grandparents, went to court and demanded rights to see their granddaughter. They refused to ever believe their son was a rapist. Some judge, who I hope thinks of this case often, allowed it as long as father was not present. It started as supervised visits and eventually turned into visitation without supervision. Mom fought as hard as she could, but she couldn't afford a lawyer like the grandparents could. Mom had to drop her daughter off to the parents of her rapist every other weekend for one night. I don't know how she did it. Anyways, I started to see a huge regression in her language skills. Her mean length of utterance decreased. She couldn't logically organize her thoughts into sentences. She couldn't categorize anymore, and so forth. Academically, when I spoke to the teacher, she said the same thing. But it really came to a head when she started to regress in other, non-school related skills. One day she wet her pants in my classroom. And she just lost it. She was crying, she destroyed my room, she was hitting and punching to the point where I had to restrain her from hurting herself. She just lost it. Finally, when she calmed down, I brought her down to the nurse, got her a change of pants. But this was a girl who was not only potty trained since I'd known her, but she was known for being sweet, polite, and just slow to warm up. She was not a child to have outbursts like this. She wasn't sick. And I felt like I really needed to say something outside the school. Long story short, grandparents were sneaking over to father's house so that her father could see and help raise his daughter. Turns out he started inappropriately touching her in the bathroom, during tub time, at the kitchen table, watching TV. Basically any chance he could when the grandparents walked out the room for any amount of time. My heart broke for the mom. I'll never forget her telling us about how she couldn't live with herself knowing the fact that the man who raped her also touched her daughter. Anyways, you can probably imagine all the hurt and heartbreak the mother felt. Story 2. A sign of sexual abuse is a child constantly grabbing their bum or genitals. When I went through training for a job, I thought, little kids are notoriously awful-ass wipers, so how would I spot the difference between a kid with an itchy, shitty bum and one who is being abused? Just a couple months after training, I noticed a young girl who constantly grabbed at her bum, and it struck me as really odd. I also noticed she would hide when a parent came to pick her up. Not in the, he come and find me way, but I really don't want to go home way, so I brought it to the attention of the director. A couple weeks later she was gone, and we were informed both parents had been arrested for making and distributing child pornography. Story 3. 9 to 12 teacher. Only 3 times have I had to call the abuse hotline. Twice I noticed at lunch duty. In one case, a kid was bringing a lunch consistently that would consist of stuff like a single piece of bread and a container of pop, but not even a real container, like a can or a bottle. It was like a Tupperware container. Other case, a girl went from typical happy teenager to choosing to sit by herself in the corner and not talk to anyone. I asked one of her former friends she would sit with, a girl who was previously in my class whom I had a good relationship with, if something was up, what had happened, etc., and she got super upset and said all the girl would say is that her stepdad was back living with them. I took that one to guidance, and they ultimately had me call along with them to voice our concern. Third one was a neglect issue. Kid would show up filthy, starving. I keep granola bars etc. in a cabinet in case a kid is hungry / didn't have a lunch. And this kid would clean me out. And not in a teenager shithead. I just want snacks man way, but a super apologetic way. Thing is, I never heard back from CPS for any of them, with the exception being the girl with the stepdad back in her life, and even that I just had to give a statement to police. It's weird that they never fill you in. Story 4. And teacher here. A lot of times when teaching kids in beginning band how to play their instruments early on, you have to touch various body parts, hands of course, arms, hips and shoulders, for getting them into proper posture alignment. I always ask before I touch anywhere, is it okay if I touch your underscore? Almost all kids say yes. I've had 2 that have said no. One was a student with autism and did not want to be touched, and the other turns out was being abused at home. It's not a guarantee, of course, but often a sign. Story 5. Many kids who are verbally abused will do the same to peers they think less of, or to younger kids. If a kid is calling someone horrible things, often things that kids should not say, like swear words or violent threats, for a minor offense like being annoying, they learn that from someone at home. You can tell the difference between learning it from an adult and just repeating something they heard on TV, because they will genuinely, really mean it, and you can hear it in their voice. Quoting something they heard on TV doesn't usually have a context the way that genuine rage does. Honestly, a kid who is just enraged all the time is a huge red flag for me. Especially if they're under like 10. Story 6. I had a terrible experience as a student who was abused at home. At one point I had a black eye every month or so. Once I had to do PE in shorts, and I had a huge black spot on my inner thighs which spread from the genitalia almost to the knee. I always told people I fell from my bike. Broke crying out of nowhere regularly. My grades were awful and I had to repeat one entire year. I was a teenager and actually asked for help to the school counselor, which, after listening to me, said, "Since your younger sister is involved, we'd have to act and call the police. If you don't want, we can just pretend we didn't have this talk." I was scared, so nothing actually happened. She left me with a bunch of sort of propaganda pamphlets. She was into politics in my school town, asking me to give them to random people. Teachers kept on treating me like a rebellious teenager with behavioral problems, even though they made many talks about speaking up to the teacher if we had problems at home or we were being abused. This was Milan, Italy, 5 to 10 years ago. Now I can usually recognize anyone who had been beaten or abused at home when they were kids in a short conversation. Story 7. My perspective is high school, grades 7 to 12. Difference in how they treat male and female teachers. I have had quite a few students who I can tell have had pretty toxic fathers because they project their issues onto me as a male teacher. Overly sensitive kids. No healthy environment produces a kid who's extremely emotionally unstable in high school. There will be a toxic or abusive environment somewhere in their life, bullying, home life or otherwise. Off comments that slip out because the kid feels it's somewhat normal, but it's way off what's normal. Like, "Don't worry, sir, it's just that I got 8 hours of sleep last week." The content of their art that they doodle in the margins. How they deal with other kids, hyperaggression or power plays are red flags. How they deal with knowing they've got an answer wrong. Those who are from toxic environments can be very fearful of retribution for any imperfection from them. Story 8. Doing things just for the sake of being in control of that thing. I have a student who shaves their eyebrows off, and another who will purposely be a few minutes late to every one of my classes. I caught them on time once by accident, and they walked right out to come back in a few moments later, so they were late. Story 8. Swedish teacher here, in Sweden. My mom was a principal for almost 30 years at a school for kids aged 6 to 12, so she'd seen some bad shit during her years. She didn't tell me everything because of non-disclosure agreements on her part, but she did tell me some things. One such thing was a young girl from Somalia. She and her parents went back to Somalia on vacation, and when they got back the girl told one of the staffers that she had been cut with scissors, down there. Now, female genital mutilation is quite common in Somalia and Eastern Africa, and extremely illegal in Sweden. So, the laws forces you to call Child Protective Services if you even suspect something's afoot. So the staffer did, and the CPS and police show up and place the girl in protective custody, and the parents are arrested and held in custody. The girl goes to an hospital and is examined, and it turns out the whole thing was a lie. The parents are furious and remove their kid from that school and threatens legal action. As far as I know, nothing came of it. Story 9. Not a teacher, but I worked with kids in a restorative justice program, basically community service, and there would be kids who would have so many hours they would come in after school and weekends for months. We had some kids who would do something petty and stupid literally weeks before they were done, despite being fairly successful in the program. It was because coming in every day and having staff ask about their life, make sure they had lunch every day and give some structure to their life was something they craved and didn't have at home. They would self-sabotage in order to keep it. It was so sad. Imagine how bad your home life has to be to choose do court-ordered manual labor rather than be at home. Story 10. My partner's mom is a teaching assistant in a classroom. She said one of the most worrying things she hears is, "Can I tell you a secret?" A lot of the time it's very innocent, but it always sets off alarm bells first.